My name is Carolyn Russell. I'm the Executive Director of A Safe Place, and welcome to our 2016 National Conference on Strategies to End Domestic Violence. And I'd like to introduce our program moderator for today. She is a Safe Place Board of Directors Vice Chair, Kathleen Chaw, and Kathleen has served in public and private nonprofit sectors for more than 35 years as a strategic communications professional, specializing in community outreach, media, and governmental affairs, and crisis communications regarding community issues, public safety, housing, transportation, and the environment. She is an author, professional editor, and documentarian. Currently, she is a director of the League of Women Voters for the Bay Area, an NGO delegate to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women for the past 5 years, addressing violence against women and girls. She is a recent recipient of the Circle of Courage Award from the Women's Intercultural Network for her work locally, nationally, and internationally as a word warrior. And she is also our vice president. So I'd like to introduce Kathleen at this time.
I have the real honor of introducing Judge Liz Hendrickson. She is a Superior Court Commissioner. She handles family law cases. And very exciting for us, she is a founding member of A Safe Place. She's going to set the stage for us with some opening remarks on kind of the evolution of law enforcement response to domestic violence. She is then going to serve as the moderator of our plenary panel, Law Enforcement Challenges Responding to Domestic Violence Calls Within Communities of Color. And she will introduce our outstanding panelists and kind of help keep going this discussion and conversation that they will have moving forward. So may we introduce Liz Hendrickson.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm very excited to be here today. And I'm not going to take long. I want us to get right in to hearing from our panel members. But I did, Carolyn asked me to say a couple things about what's gone on the last 40 years, because I've been blessed to have my legal career completely overlap with the domestic violence movement. When I was in law school in the 1970s, I went to work as a law student at La Casa de las Madres, which was the first Bay Area shelter. And we did not have a restraining order law yet. We did not have the Domestic Violence Prevention Act yet. We did not have emergency protective orders. We did not have TROs. And our very complicated relationship, the domestic violence movement with law enforcement, started right then, because law enforcement was the moving force behind the restraining order law. And that bill was carried by retired law enforcement in our state legislature in the late 1970s, because they knew how dangerous these calls were and how these families weren't being served. They saw it on a daily basis. At the same time, one of the other people who helped found A Safe Place, Eva Jefferson Patterson, was a legal aid lawyer here in Oakland. And what she and her colleague Pauline G. saw was that when women called the Oakland police, they would not get the person hurting them arrested, because Oakland had a written policy of arrest avoidance, the kind of walk around the block policy. In addition, what we saw was that when somebody was arrested and the case was taken to the district attorney, if a woman had been beaten up on the street by a stranger and ended up in the hospital, well, that would be a felony assault. If she was beaten up in her own home, that would be a misdemeanor. Same injuries. And so Eva sued the Oakland Police Department, the first such lawsuit in the country, Scott v. Hart, and it resulted in a consent decree, and we went to the police academy and started doing training on domestic violence. Now, I can't say I was in my early 30s. I looked like a teenager. I had brown hair, Carolyn knows, we worked together in the church basement, and some of the officers would sit there and read the newspaper when I was talking. We went to every shift change with the Oakland PD to update them on what the law was once the restraining order passed and once the consent decree was in force. So we got access and we partnered with OPD in that kind of training and change. So fast forward 40 years, what do we have now? When that restraining order law was passed, you'd have a hearing and you'd get a restraining order that was good for 90 days. That was then changed over the years so that the people who could ask for a restraining order was expanded to include people who did not live together but who dated, to include elders. It was expanded from 90 days to 6 months to a year, now 5 years. And then other gaps were identified, including the gap between when someone is arrested and when somebody can get their paperwork into the courthouse. And so we have emergency protective orders that are good for a week and that are issued over the phone. And I take those calls once every 8 weeks for 7 days, 24/7. And these officers call me, sometimes in the middle of the night. I hope that I'm always polite at that time. So we've seen a tremendous evolution, but that conflictual relationship hasn't changed. Because what we need and what the police can offer is always evolving. And it's complicated. When somebody calls, what they want is they first want to be safe, but they second want the behavior to change. Most of the time, we want that family member or that community member to change his or her behavior. We don't just want them removed. And our communities are being inundated with things that are different. Veterans that are coming home that have concussive closed head injuries and PTSD. Formerly incarcerated people who've been traumatized while they were imprisoned, maybe in solitary confinement for months or years, and have mental health issues and are coming out. Drugs that we didn't have 40 years ago that cause people to damage their brains and act crazy. And we call the police, and sometimes they themselves are injured or killed in these interactions. So it's complicated. And I'm going to ask our panelists today to answer 2 questions. We're going to go around twice. I'm going to ask them to tell us what they're proudest of, what they think is innovative and is working that their department is doing. And then I'm going to ask them what they're seeing in their department. What are they seeing in their community that's an emerging issue? And in preparing for this, I've been so impressed with how many innovative things our departments are doing. Before I introduce our panelists, in addition to my shout out to Carolyn, who I'm so grateful for her work over these decades, I was there when she came to A Safe Place. I also want to simply dedicate my participation today to Natalie Zarchin, who was the original bookkeeper at A Safe Place and who passed last year. Because, you know, it takes all kinds of people to run our organization. And if the bills aren't paid and the bank statement isn't balanced, it doesn't work. So I was there when Natalie was hired and kept in touch with her over the years. She often came to these events over the years. So let me introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to sit down and ask them to turn on their microphones so that we can go forward. I'm going to go right in order. I have from Berkeley, Sergeant Amber Phillips and Detective Melissa Kelly. I have from Emeryville, Chief Jennifer Tejeda. I have from Contra Costa, Assistant District Attorney Dana Filkowski.
My name is Detective Melissa Kelly. I'm with the Berkeley Police Department, and I'm here with Sergeant Phillips. We both work for our Special Victims Units, and I want to tell you a little bit about Berkeley quickly. For those of you who don't know, we're a city of about 120,000 people, And we do, of course, have the university, so we have some very special dynamics going on in our city. Our special victims unit, we primarily investigate domestic violence, sexual assault, crimes against children, stalking, kidnapping, crimes of that nature. So kind of the traditional special victims unit crimes. So some things in domestic violence that Berkeley does a little differently. We have a policy in place for emergency protective orders, and that, of course, is the 7-day order that can be issued by a commissioner at the time that a crime is committed. Most agencies determine based on the facts whether or not they're going to request that order. We have a policy in place that at every domestic violence call, we will call a commissioner and request an emergency protective order. Obviously, there's some benefits in that. You take away the guesswork. We make sure that every call gets that potential of having an emergency protective order. One of the downsides is that it takes a little bit more of our time, and sometimes we're calling on calls that don't necessarily rise up to that, but that's up to the commissioner to decide that. So overall, though, it's a very positive thing. We're making sure that more of the victims of these kinds of crimes are getting the services and getting that protective order. Another thing the city of Berkeley has that's unique to the Bay Area, we have our own mental health program. The city runs it, and they call a mobile crisis team that's on duty. Most of the time they're on duty, I think about 20 hours out of the day, go off during the wee hours of the morning. So when we have a domestic violence call, it's very common for mobile crisis mental health workers to actually come to the call and be there from the beginning for the victims, to offer them resources and offer them support right there in the field. And that's something that I think we've seen very often become a huge part of recovering from the cycle of violence.
Okay. I neglected to introduce our own Sergeant John Ruiz from Oakland PD. And my bad, I live here. And so we'll be hearing from him, but this is the gentleman that's here. And thank you, and my apologies.
So again, hi, I'm Amber Phillips. I'm the sergeant of our Special Victims Unit at Berkeley Police. As Detective Kelly had mentioned, one other thing that Berkeley we do is every single domestic violence case that is investigated that comes to the detective division is sent over to our domestic violence advocate through the county. Her name's Tanisha. She's excellent, and she reviews every single police report. So we are required within our policy to send every single case, regardless if the victim is cooperative or not, because most likely, or most of the time, victims aren't always cooperative with police, but they are a lot more cooperative when the domestic violence advocate will reach out to them. So that is something that every single case is reviewed by them. We review it, and whether or not the DA is going to charge, at least they are given the resources and the advocacy is needed, because a lot of times, they're repeat victims that don't always go through the legal process, aren't willing to go through that. So we offer the advocacy every single time, consistently.
Chief, what's going well in Emeryville?
Okay, so what's going well is I'm a chief of police in the Bay Area, and I have a job today. So I've been at Emeryville for a little over a year. Most of my career has been in Marin County. I did start out in Walnut Creek, but I spent 20 plus years in Marin County, and when I went over there, I was very fortunate because Marin County was just beginning to realize that there was an issue with domestic violence, and this was in the mid-1990s, and an issue with the lack of appropriate response and calling offenders to account and protecting victims, and really believing that domestic violence is a solvable crime. So I was tasked with joining that effort. And back then, we didn't have a lot of software to do analysis, and I was tasked with reading 800 domestic violence reports and finding out what the trends were, where it was happening, when it was happening, whether there were repeat offenders, repeat victims, whether children were present. So I was eating and sleeping domestic violence for about a year and a half. But it was a great really great for me because it helped develop my passion around protecting victims and preventing domestic violence and sexual assault. So that became my thing in Marin County. We had a very robust response to domestic violence in Marin County. We had a county response policy, response to domestic violence, that every agency signed off on. There was our community coordinated response, which was another coordinated response to domestic violence. We met quarterly. I was the co-chair of that for a while. We looked at trends throughout the county, not just in individual cities, because just like other crimes, domestic violence can move around. And so I'm new to Emeryville, and I'm learning. That's what's new in Emeryville. I'm learning how we can improve, because it's a little different than what I'm used to. And so last week I had the DA's office come in and speak to my officers. I'm just seeing a little bit of lack of consistency in how we address domestic violence and in Emeryville. And so I personally have a lot of work to do in my city to get my response to where I feel is appropriate to address the crime of domestic violence and protect our victims and hold offenders accountable. So my ask of you, if anybody is in the room, wants to help me out, I'm just looking for help, because we do have a lot of work to do, and domestic violence has not gone away. And it is a crime, of control and power. And we really just have to be vigilant and keep working at it and keep working together. And so it's an honor for me to be invited here, even though I don't have a lot to share with you about what we're doing in Emeryville, because we're just reformatting, we're training, we're doing a lot of things to get us to where we need to be. So nothing really new to share.
Thank you.
Sergeant Oakland.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sergeant John Ruiz with the Oakland Police Department, and I'm in charge of the Domestic Violence Unit at OPD. And I've been working for OPD for 10 years, and I have been in charge of the unit for about 6 months. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be here, and I'm thankful to you guys that have invited me to come to do this conference. One of the things we do a lot of things well, but there's things that we need to improve upon. But one of the many things that we do well is that our unit, it's located at the Family Justice Center. Everyone familiar with that? Yes, right. And we have a great working relationship, not just with the DA's office, with Paul Penny, who's the DA in charge of looking at reviewing domestic violence cases, but also with FELC, the Family Violence Law Center, with BAWAR, and with a lot of other organizations that work within that building, right? So if we have any information that we want to get out to the troops in patrol, then we just consult with them, and we get the information and we roll it out. Other things that we do, that we're preparing to do next month, it's do lineup training with Deputy DA Paul Penny to ensure that the folks in the field are getting updated information, right? And some of that, it's I know this is old, but some of that stuff is that we sometimes miss is making sure that they're classifying the crimes correctly, like a 273.5 and a 243E1. Everybody's familiar with that, right? Sometimes we have a disconnect with that, so that's what we do for training. Other things that we do well is we're really good, in my opinion, communicating with the FELC advocates, or 24-hour hotline. And I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Andrea Barnes, right? Yeah? No, I am. So, we communicate with them, and we encourage our officers to, when they respond to a domestic violence incident or to take a report, to whether the suspect is in custody or not, to reach out to the advocates, the 24-hour hotline, and so we could provide the victim with some services, right? Because I think that goes a long way when we try to give the victim resources when right after the incident happened and you have advocates there, then I think that goes a long way as far as them continuing or stopping the cycle of violence within their relationships. And the last thing that I would like to say that we do well in Oakland is just recently all the patrol officers got a departmental cell phone. So one of the things that we have done in the past is that we have asked them to call for a technician. But whether you know it or not, we're really busy. Over the weekend, we got over 100 cases of domestic violence routed to our unit, right? But that's the nature of the beast for us, right? I'm used to it, and we deal with it. We deal with it. We prioritize reports, and we deal with them accordingly. And because of that, the technicians that are assigned out on the field and that we call, if they're tied up on a homicide or a shooting, right, and they cannot come to our domestic violence incident, then we encourage officers to take photographs with the department cell phones, right? Because to me, that's a great tool, right? We try to use all our tools that are at our disposal, like advocates and department cell phones. But if for some reason that's not working, then we also encourage them to use their PDRDs. Everybody's familiar with PDRDs, the body cameras that we have, right? So that's some of the things. And if you have any questions, I'm here. So I'm welcome, you guys to ask me questions if you have any. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now that we've heard from our police departments, let's hear from the district attorney and what some of the things that district attorneys' offices can do to handle these cases once they come from the police to their office.
So I am not in Alameda County. I'm Contra Costa County. I'm right next door. My name is Dana Filkowski. I've been with the DA's office in Contra Costa for almost 20 years. I've been working in various assignments that deal with intimate partner battering for nearly my entire career. What's working well with our county is our Zero Tolerance Initiative. For more information, you can Google Contra Costa Zero Tolerance Initiative, and you'll get all of our web pages about that. But about 16 years ago, our County Board of Supervisors recognized that we had a ton of people working in the field of domestic violence, everybody intending to do good work and make the most meaningful impact that we could on intimate partner battering in our community, except none of us knew who the others were. So that meant, without any identification or collaboration, that we were either all working on the same 5 things, ignoring the other 10 things that needed to be done. We were inadvertently working at cross purposes with each other. We were competing for the same grant funding. And we were not having the most meaningful impact that we could and holding accountable our offenders and providing services to our victims and trying to heal families. So the Board of Supervisors received legislative approval through then Senator Tom Torlakson to create funding for a coordinated countywide approach to identifying and coordinating resources targeted at responding to domestic violence. And that was our Zero Tolerance Initiative. What we were given permission to do back in the year 2000 was to have a 4-year pilot program and raise fees on vital statistics records. So birth certificates, death certificates, marriage certificates. Anytime anybody goes to get a copy of one of those, a couple extra bucks goes into a fund that's administered by our Board of Supervisors. And the great thing about government funding is when the government gives you money, the government can hold you accountable. They can set standards, and you have to meet those standards and have transparency if you want to keep getting that funding. And that allowed us to kind of pierce the veil of some of our advocacy organizations where we weren't sure what they were doing or if it was really in alignment with what we wanted to do as a county. We could hold our law enforcement partners accountable, and the district attorney's office could have transparency and accountability with our community partners and help build trust, which was very, very important back then. So the program was so successful that the funding mechanism was made permanent, and we went from responding to domestic violence to adding a series of other family relationship violence programs to that initiative. I came on in 2000 to start the county's first elder abuse prosecution unit. Since then, we've added to domestic violence. We now handle through our Zero Tolerance Initiative, domestic violence, elder independent adult abuse, child abuse, sexual assault, and now human trafficking. Sadly, we don't have any additional funding to do all of that great work. But what we've done that I think is working really, really well in our county is identified all of our partners, brought everybody to the table, and every year we come up with what our Zero Tolerance core objectives are. And we have community-based partners, law enforcement, social services, and prosecution who all agree to what our mission is. And then we account every year through a report to our Board of Supervisors. So we can look at what progress we've identified that needs to be made and what progress we're actually making as a community toward meeting those objectives. Probably the shining jewel of our Zero Tolerance Initiative has been our Family Justice Center. We've done it differently than most other communities. Instead of establishing one great big center and hoping all of our victims can find their way there, we recognize that our community is very diverse. It's very diverse culturally, socially, economically, and geographically. So we're pretty spread out. We don't have one major metropolitan area with great public transportation that people can get themselves to. We don't have the equivalent of Oakland. Our county seat is Martinez. How many people have never been to Martinez? Yeah, most of you. I would have no reason to go there if I didn't work there every day. It's that place you pass when you're going to Benicia with all the refineries. Yeah, that's where we are. So if we stuck our Family Justice Center there, no one would come. So we have a regionalized approach to Family Justice Center. Our first center opened in Richmond, and we have co-located resources for victims there with the goal of making it one-stop shopping for victims of all of those types of crimes that I identified. The best thing that we have is our entire Special Victims Unit for the Richmond Police Department is located there. And so victims come to meet with detectives at the center. They are immediately connected to an advocate, and our employees at the centers are called navigators, and their jobs are to understand every single resource available to victims in our communities and to help the victim identify what resources she wants first to be connected with. We always start with safety planning, but then we've divided our resources into wellness domains, and we try to give some autonomy, some power, some control back to our victims, and we invite them, choose where you'd like to go next. In our Richmond Center, we now have a free healthcare clinic that comes once a week and provides healthcare services without regard to immigration status that's never addressed or asked at our centers. We're trying to get the community to walk through the door so we can identify what's going on and connect them to services. Our second center opened in our central part of our county, which is Concord. Both of our centers are located in safe communities that are not part of any gang territory, which was a challenge for us, especially in Richmond. They're family-friendly centers, and they are accessible by public transportation. The next center is scheduled to open in the east part of our county, probably Pittsburgh, although with the success in Richmond and Central County, we're very happy that our cities are fighting over who gets the next one. In our Central County Family Justice Center, we have 6 different police agencies that staff the center. I have a prosecutor that is at the center at least one day every week. My trial attorneys rotate through there so that we are, again, trying to connect with our community partners as directly and often as possible. We have more than 20 community partners that work with each center. We have community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, culturally specific organizations. One of the groups that we've just partnered with is the Rainbow Community Center in Concord so that we can better serve the LGBTQ community. We work with Naraka House. I see that you guys are here today, trying to reach our growing Asian and East Indian population. And so far, it's been tremendously successful. We've just started a multidisciplinary team which meets monthly to bring all of our partners together to address challenging cases and determine as a community how we best can support the victims.
Thank you. I'm going to ask our police agencies to now address a second question, which is, what are they seeing where they think there's need, gaps? And specifically, if they could address the question of how do we change behavior? How do we heal perpetrators? And are there emerging communities or immigrant communities? Are there categories of people, veterans, formerly incarcerated persons? Are there adequate services for those people? Where are they seeing gaps? Certainly it's impressive what we're seeing in terms of coordinated responses and police inviting in social workers, mental health workers, and others right on the scene so that a family gets an effective intervention. Anything you're seeing that you think your department's struggling with or our communities are struggling with?
So a couple things that we're seeing as kind of trends in domestic violence. We're seeing a lot more of same gender violence within couples. And also we have a sizable community in Berkeley of Yemeni immigrants. And we've had a few domestic violence, sexual assault cases, child abuse cases involving that community. And they're very resistant to not just police, but all services, and it's a problem that we're facing. And now Sergeant Phillips.
One other thing I was thinking about that we also are seeing is domestic violence within the younger relationships and communities. High school, we obviously have the college population with Go Bears, and so we're seeing that as well. And I think the best way, and that we're probably lacking, is the education probably that needs to start within the high schools. As well as reaching out. University does have a lot of resources, whether it be sexual assault related or domestic violence. They have their own advocacy, and they cooperate and work with us pretty well. So we have a good relationship with UCPD as well as their advocates. But I think where we can do better is we have a high school, Berkeley High, and the community in the high school. There's 3,300 kids there. The majority, or not majority, but a large population of those kids do not live in our city. They're from they're from Oakland. They're from Richmond. They come as far as Vallejo, Antioch, because Berkeley's just it's a good school. And so the challenge in the education is, if we're not reaching them within the schools, is being able to contact the parents in the homes, is they don't live in our city. So it's a challenge, whether it's domestic violence related or any sort of violence or sexual assault education, is trying to have the parental cooperation and involvement. But that's one of the major things that we can do better is educating our younger community in our city.
Thank you. I agree. I think one of the areas that's underserved is the homeless population. We have a lot of cross-border exposure to crime in that community. And so what I get in Emeryville, Berkeley probably has, Oakland probably has, because we share borders. And so, from my perspective, again, Emeryville is a little behind the 8 ball in our response, in our resources, in our training, in our partnerships. And so my challenge is to really, focus our efforts on identifying additional resources, because what Berkeley has is absolutely wonderful, but I don't have those resources, so I'm not serving my domestic violence victim in the same vein that Berkeley and Oakland are. And so how do I address that? And I think going back to what Contra Costa County said is, I'm familiar with this county coordinated response concept, that we're all sharing resources, we're all sharing our efforts, our information, our best practices to address domestic violence. And so that's one thing. I hear what you're saying about the high school. Emeryville has a great new Center for Community Living that has a K through 12 school, as well as offices for public health, dental care, social services, community support. But about 60% of our students plus are from other cities. And so how do we serve that community when a lot of the issues that they bring to school and cause problems are initiated from what's happening in their own community? So it's a really big challenge to reach that population. Not to reach them, we can reach them, but where's the continuity of care and support and advocacy, and how do we make that happen? So I understand what Berkeley is saying there. And I think that's it.
Oh, thank you, Chief. What everybody else said. That's what we do. No, some of the things that I think we need to improve on in the Oakland Police Department, it's we know we serve a diverse population, right? There's Spanish speakers, Arabic, Cantonese. And one of the things that we do that we just started encouraging our patrol officers is to, we discourage them from asking family members, hey, can you when we take a written statement from the victim as a family member, God forbid a child, right? We discourage that 100%. But what we do to try to bridge that gap is we call officers that are working that speak that language. But if everything fails, then we encourage them to use the language line, right? And so we could take a statement. We take the victim to a separate room so so the family doesn't hear everything that went on, because a lot of times we know that could be challenging for the victim, and we don't want to traumatize the whole family as they were. So we encourage that. And the other thing that I think we need to improve upon, it's communicating with the community as far as letting them know that their immigration status, it's irrelevant to us, right? Some of the things that I've done personally, it's I've worked with Mujeres Unidas. I'm not sure if anyone here is from that organization, and I've taught, I've done training with them, right, to inform them that that's okay. We don't care about that. The Oakland Police Department doesn't care about your immigration status. All they care about is keeping the victim safe, provide resources to them, and to ensure the crimes are solved, right? And that's it, and prosecute it, right? We investigate it, and we forward the the reports to the DA's office, and we tell them that, right? But I also speak Spanish, so that information, if it comes from a native speaker, in my opinion, I think they understand it better, and they're better informed about the resources that we have to offer. So, thank you.
So I want to give you 2 problems and 2 solutions because I get to go last, so I heard what everybody else is doing. Our Zero Tolerance initiative has as one of its projects the No More campaign. Anybody remember from the Super Bowl a few years ago? So everybody loves athletes, and when an athlete speaks, kids will listen. So the NFL got its own black eye a few years ago because there's a lot of domestic abuse that seemed to be tolerated within professional sports. And so during the Super Bowl, when everyone on earth is watching television, athletes said, "No more," and they gave those messages. Part of that campaign was they created a ready-made campaign for communities to adopt and introduce to schools. You can look at ours on the Zero Tolerance website. What we invite student athletes to do is film their own PSAs. We just presented this to our Board of Supervisors last week to tremendous acclaim. We've won an award for our program here, and it's very easy to replicate and drop into any school. You can do something as small as speaking to your athletes after practice or after school practices, so you're not impacting instructional time, which has been one of our challenges, is being one more program that a school needs to accommodate. Or De La Salle and Carondelet just had us over for a huge all-school assembly, and we brought Tony Porter, who's a leadership speaker and talks to young men about the role that men can play in ending violence against women and girls. And it was really, really powerful to participate in that and have him ask these boys, these athletes, what are you going to do to make a difference? And nobody had ever asked them that before. So there's the No More campaign. Toward getting your communities to understand what resources are available and to feel safe and to trust those resources, what our community or what our family violence centers have done is created a community fellowship program. So we've identified leaders within our communities, within cultural communities, within economic communities, and within geographical communities, and we have a stipend. And we've invited them to come and work with the Family Justice Center for a period of time and learn what the different roles are. What do the advocates do? What do the community partners do? What do our law enforcement partners actually do? And they're coming to shadow my prosecutors at the DA's office for an entire day at the end of this week. What happens in a prosecution? Those are things communities don't know because no one they know is doing it. So when we invite a community member to come and see and invest, and we invest in them, they take that back into their communities where they're already trusted and respected, and we can start a grassroots level of trust and support that hopefully will continue to spread. So those are 2 of our solutions. 2 of our problems are we have a growing immigrant population in our county that is growing more rapidly than we can address, particularly in the south part of our community, which is generally considered to be affluent, and therefore we don't need services. And that is our Indian population and our Asian population. Indian population is so big, we don't even know who's in it. They will not talk to law enforcement. We're building tremendous housing out there, and it's all bedroom community for high tech. When we have domestic violence, there are cultural issues that are massive impediments to calling police and accepting intervention and resources, particularly the idea that your spouse cannot be raped. So that's one huge challenge for us. And I'll stop there because you're giving me 1 minute.
I can't thank our panelists enough. It's very exciting to me to hear from folks who are really just engaged with this issue and thoughtful, and we want to just take a couple questions. And I also want to say I have a question for you all, and that is that fellowship program. I love that idea of inviting community members to come in and shadow in the courts, in law enforcement, and see how the system works so that folks can have a better idea and interpret that. Our court has sponsored How the Court Works programs where folks from agencies come in and hear the details of that. Is there anything like that that you'd like to see? Any just kind of shout outs about that? And I've got a couple quick questions also. One is, and actually I spoke to several of our panelists over the weekend, and Dana and I talked about the lack of services for female perpetrators. And we're seeing veterans, for instance, who come back, female veterans with the same kind of PTSD, the same kind of erratic behavior, and in totally inadequate services. And anything else that anybody wants to say about that? I want to say one other thing, because you folks are often the ones in Sacramento and Washington who lobby about changes in policies, funding, and laws. And so all I can say is thank you, but obviously we need more. But also keep in touch with us, because there are unintended consequences to policy changes and legal changes. And if we're all talking, I think we can make those policies more responsive. Any last comments? I want to thank our panel so much, and thank you for your attention this morning.
All of our services are coordinated through our Zero Tolerance Initiative, and we have many of them co-located at our family justice centers. So victims can come in, and it's one-stop shopping for all services that we can link in our community for victims.
Alameda County has a similar center. It's here in Oakland on 27th.
So most of your things are not done necessarily from the courthouse necessarily.
No, our courts are overwhelmed. I'm guessing you're one of our national speakers. Yes, so our governor has decided to slash the court budget every year for the way too many years he's been there, sorry. If you work in the courts, it's very, very frustrating because we're constantly getting the message that we need to do more with less, and we're at the point where we can't any longer. We had a domestic violence court that gave the necessary additional monitoring to offenders so that they would not re-engage in violence. And initially that court served over 500 misdemeanor offenders where there were children in the home, children in common, or prior convictions, because we were trying to intervene before they escalated to felony violence. The court said that we couldn't continue that program anymore because of funding. So they got a grant to create what they thought would be an intensive support program, and we would target high-risk felony offenders. But we couldn't agree on really how to effectively do that. The idea was to take the drug court model and apply it to family violence, which has some strengths, but when you reoffend as a substance abuser, your only victim typically is yourself. When a domestic violence perpetrator reoffends, I either have the same victim, the kids as victims, or a new victim, and we're really struggling on what to do and how to do, but we just lost that grant funding. And at the end of this week, we're asking for an innovations grant, but if the funding isn't there for that, I will lose what was probably the best accountability measure for our community, which was all that we had through the courts. So the rest of it we're really doing from a community-based level, because that's where the funding is.
Okay, we also had a question of how are faith-based organizations involved in being part of getting rid of DV, and I do think that our faith-based organizations, certainly here in our county, respond to some of the populations that we're talking about, formerly incarcerated folks, teenagers, folks who are coming back as veterans, and all of whom have been traumatized. Any other questions? Sir?
I've been trying to work with a couple of religious communities, and I encourage them, not just now, but I always have, to contact me. That way, if they would like us to inform their fellowship about what domestic violence is and inform them about how to get resources, they're always welcome to contact me. And I know just recently I've been in contact or playing phone tag with Pastor Philip Scott. Is she here today? No? I was told she was going to be here. But, just doing from the community, right? And to bridge that gap, not just with in my case, with the Hispanic community giving training or with other communities within Oakland, but also with, churches and stuff. So, because I think that's great, right? That's just like another advocacy group that could assist us in solving and stopping the cycle of violence when it comes to domestic violence. So I encourage that. So if you're from the community here in Oakland and you would like us to do some training going forward, I'm more than welcome to do that and to assist the community in that way.
We've got two last questions here and here. Go ahead, ma'am.
Department of Corrections for CTF Solidarity. And I've been on the inside in the penitentiary with quite a few young offenders. And I see that happening, and I hear you say some of the funding that you could get, they're getting ready to wipe it out. We're in an economic downturn. We hear about the prison pipeline. These are things that are right in our face. There's no services for mentally ill people standing in the street talking to themselves all day. Every now and again they rape and attack folk. There's nowhere for them to go. They're sleeping under the freeway as I speak. God knows we've got to sit here with all of this intelligence and figure out what we're going to do, because it's a cooker for what's going on. And we have to do something for our children that are being shot dead in the street because the police don't have any alternatives. They're leaping in their face. They're coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq with PTSD, and some of our police officers have it too. And they don't know how to deal with what they see as a threat because of the way they're trained. When do you de-escalate this behavior among the police department and then in our community? Those that are getting out of prison, coming out of the hole, that have been mentally affected from being locked up because they're so violent when they're incarcerated. It's a two-way street, and we have to do something about it. We're all either going to be victimized or we're just going to allow it to overtake us, and it's issuing out. And when I hear people say we have funding, but I'm getting ready to lose it, this is an economic downturn. We're going through an election. It's not going to be okay if this arm of our society, the law enforcement agencies, domestic violence shelters, and this type of work is not really funded properly. Our lives depend on it. Can anybody address anything I said?
That finger pointing is not serving anybody or any cause, and we all have to work together. We have to keep our eye on politicians who reduce funding in critical service areas. And I think with this election, we are faced with some issues on those ballot measures. It's no secret that I'm opposed to the Prop 64 legalization of marijuana, because it's not just about smoking pot. It's about creating more of the issues that you just raised: mental health issues, homelessness, violence on the streets. It's about, growing pot in houses, in your neighbors' houses. We won't be able to do anything about it. Kids smoking pot, it's a gateway drug. We won't be able to do anything about it. I'm telling you now, this is going to put California, we're circling the drain, it's going to put us down the drain. And I think you're absolutely right. We have to work together as a large community, not segments of the community finger pointing, because as a police chief in the Bay Area, I have to tell you, I'm working with my officers every single day of the week, talking about de-escalation, talking about being respectful in the community. And it is challenging every day for them to go out on the streets, because 95% of the people respect them. They respect everybody. It is that small percentage who's just really challenging what we do and how we do. And guess what? The police are the front line for all these issues that you bring up. We're the first point of contact. I have to make sure I have social workers, psychologists, law enforcement officers, uncles, dads, whatever they need to be, moms, to relate to the people they're meeting on the street. It is an impossible task for me to turn out a well-rounded officer that can address all the issues you just spoke about. It's impossible. I don't have the resources. I have a governor who's shrinking budgets. I have ballot measures that are going to put California down the drain. So let's get all together. Let's get all in, lean in on this, and let's save California and restore justice and services for people, and just approach things with common sense.
In terms of domestic violence, do you see or perceive any differences between male perpetrators of domestic violence versus women, because what we see most frequently is even if the man places the call because he's trying to keep from being violent, he's taken off to jail anyway, or he's removed from the home anyway. And do you see any different procedures that are in place, that should be in place, to address that part of the equation? Because frequently, men are not always the perpetrators, and sometimes they're the victims frequently as well.
So that's an issue that we really struggle with, because we agree that anybody can perpetrate violence. The trends that we see, strangulation victims are 99% female. Men strangle women. Women are more common with arson. I don't think I have any male domestic violence cases involving arson, but we've had several cases of women burning things in retaliation, and burning people. So I have 2 attempt murder cases where the women are perpetrators and the male former partners are victims. More weapons cases involving women, and always when we have a female perpetrator, we have the domestic violence defense. So women claim in reality or in just using cultural stereotypes that don't see women as violent perpetrators, that this is responsive and due to their own history of being battered. They're very, very difficult cases for us to investigate and to prosecute. We have to overcome law enforcement biases against female perpetrators. We have to overcome social biases against female defendants. Very difficult for us to get a conviction. I have a female defendant now who is a veteran, and she was tired of her boyfriend or her husband and her brother-in-law partying with their drunk friends, and so she went and got her gun, loaded it, and threatened to kill everybody and chambered around so everybody would know she was very, very serious. And now the family doesn't want me to touch the case. But I want to be able to treat it the same as I would if it was a male perpetrator. But I can't necessarily do that. The problem is there's just no one size fits all. So they're evolving issues. They're very, very complicated issues, mostly complicated by the fact that we have almost no services for female offenders. There are no or few intimate partner battery classes for women, and there are none that are culturally specific or available in languages that we would need.
Please let us thank Judge Hendrickson and the whole panel.